The security room on the 42nd floor of Kwan Tower was not a place most people knew existed. It sat behind a steel door that required both a keycard and a fingerprint scan to open, and the only person who used it regularly, outside of the head of security, was Kwon Jae-won himself. He came here late at night, sometimes just to think. The rows of monitors showing every corridor, every elevator, every parking bay of the building gave him a sense of control he rarely felt anywhere else. He was the kind of man who needed to see everything. Who trusted no one. Who had built an empire from scratch by the age of 35 not because he was lucky, but because he never once looked away. It was on a Tuesday night in late November that he first noticed her. He had not been looking for anything in particular. He was scrolling through the feeds out of habit, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his jacket thrown over the back of the chair, when his eyes landed on the feed for Corridor 7 on the 14th floor. A woman was mopping the floor alone. That in itself was not unusual. The cleaning staff often worked late. But something about the way she moved made him pause. She was not rushing. She was not dragging herself through the motions the way most people did when they thought no one was watching. She was moving with a kind of quiet dignity, like the work mattered to her, like she had decided long ago that whatever she did, she would do it fully or not at all. She paused at one point, leaned on the mop handle, and tilted her head back slightly, eyes closed, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Then she straightened, rolled her shoulders, and kept going. Kwon Jae-won watched for 4 minutes without realizing how much time had passed. He told himself it was nothing. He closed that feed and moved on. But the next night, without fully meaning to, he found himself pulling up Corridor 7 again. She was there. This time she was wiping down the glass panels near the fire exit, and she had her phone propped against the wall, and even through the silent CCTV feed he could tell she was laughing at something on the screen. Her whole body moved when she laughed. Her shoulders, her head, everything. It was the kind of laugh that made a room feel warmer even when you were watching from 42 floors above on a grainy monitor. He caught himself smiling. He stopped immediately. He was Kwon Jae-won. He did not smile at CCTV footage. He closed the feed, finished his whiskey, and went home. By the end of that week, he had pulled up Corridor 7 every single night. He told himself he was monitoring staff performance. That was his job. He owned the building. He owned the company. He was responsible for everything that happened within these walls, including whether the cleaning staff were doing their jobs properly. It was professional. It was reasonable. It was completely normal. He almost believed it. Her name, he found out through HR, was Adiz Okonkwo. She had been with the building's facilities team for 8 months. Nigerian-born, Seoul-based for 3 years. Her performance reviews were spotless. She had never been late. She had never called in sick. One of her supervisors had written in a note, unprompted, that she was the kind of person who made the whole team better just by showing up. Kwon read that line twice. He set the file down. He picked it up again. He told himself he was being thorough. He was not being thorough. If you are new to this channel, welcome to Afro Korean Love Tales, where every story is about real emotions, real sacrifice, and the kind of love that changes people forever. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story. He saw her in person for the first time on a Thursday morning. He had arrived early, which was unusual, and he stepped out of the elevator on the 14th floor because he realized he had left a document with his operations manager whose office was on that floor. He turned the corner and almost walked straight into her. She was pushing a trolley loaded with cleaning supplies and she stopped just in time, her hand shooting out to steady a bottle of disinfectant that had rocked dangerously close to the edge. She looked up at him. He looked at her. For a moment neither of them said anything. She had deep rich dark brown skin and natural hair pulled back from her face and eyes that were completely steady, not nervous, not deferential, just calm and direct in a way that very few people managed when they found themselves standing 2 feet away from Kwon Jae-won. Most people flinched. She did not flinch. She said, "Good morning, sir," in clear, accented English, and then she moved her trolley to the side to give him space to pass. He said nothing. He walked past her. He got to his operations manager's office, collected his document, and stood in the corridor for a full 30 seconds before he realized he had no memory of the conversation that had just taken place because his mind had stayed 2 floors back. This was a problem. Kwon Jae-won did not have problems of this nature. He had business problems. Strategic problems. Logistical problems. He did not have problems that involved losing 30 seconds of consciousness because a woman in a blue uniform had said good morning to him. He went back to his office. He worked for 14 hours straight. He did not go to the security room that night. He went the night after. There she was. Corridor 7. Mopping again. And this time, at one point, she stopped and sat cross-legged on the floor right there in the corridor, pulled something out of her uniform pocket, and began reading. He zoomed in. It was a small paperback book. He could not make out the title. She read for maybe 10 minutes, completely absorbed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as she turned a page, and then she put the book away, stood up, stretched her arms above her head in a long slow stretch that seemed to release something from her whole body, and went back to work. He watched her for 40 minutes that night. He was in serious trouble and he knew it. The thing about Kwon Jae-won was that he was not a man who had been built for softness. He had grown up in a household where emotion was considered weakness and success was the only language anyone spoke. His father had been a man of sharp angles and harder expectations, and Jae-won had learned early that the best way to survive was to become exactly that, all angles, no softness, nothing that could be used against him. He had been engaged once, briefly, to a woman his family approved of, and it had ended badly, not because of cruelty but because of absence, because he had not known how to be present, how to let someone in, how to do anything other than build walls and call it stability. He had been 31. He had not tried again. And now he was 35, sitting in a security room watching a woman read a paperback on a corridor floor at 11:30 at night, and something inside him that he had cemented shut a long time ago was developing a crack. He did not like it. He also could not stop it. The next week, he did something he had never done before. He adjusted his schedule so that he arrived at the office at 7:30 in the morning, which was when the night cleaning shift was finishing up. He told his assistant it was because he had early calls to make. His assistant, who had worked for him for 6 years and knew better than to question him, simply updated his calendar. He saw her in the lobby at 7:42. She was handing over her trolley to the day shift and signing out in the logbook near the service entrance. She had her bag on her shoulder and she was talking to one of her colleagues, a younger woman who was laughing at something Ada had said. Ada herself had a small satisfied smile on her face, the kind of smile that was not performed for anyone, that existed simply because she found something genuinely funny, and that small private smile did more damage to Kwon Jae-won's carefully constructed composure than anything had in years. He made himself walk past. He made himself get into the elevator. He made himself go to his office and open his laptop and read his emails. He read the same email 4 times. By the second week of December, things had escalated in a direction Kwon had not anticipated. He had started leaving the security room feed for Corridor 7 open on the secondary monitor in his actual office, muted, just running in the corner of his screen while he worked. He told himself it was because he was reviewing building security comprehensively. This was a lie so thin it was almost transparent, and some part of him knew it, but he maintained it with the same iron focus he applied to everything else in his life. What cracked the lie open was a Friday night, the 15th of December, when he was still in the office at midnight finishing a proposal and he glanced at the secondary monitor and saw that Ada's trolley was parked outside the service elevator but Ada was nowhere on the corridor. He felt a strange lurch in his chest. He switched to the elevator feed. Not there. He switched to the stairwell camera. Not there either. He pulled up the fire escape feed. Nothing. For 3 full minutes he cycled through feeds with a focus that had nothing professional about it, and when he finally found her on a feed he rarely checked, the small storage room on the 14th floor that was used for extra supplies, he saw her sitting on an upturned bucket in the corner of the room, her face in her hands, her shoulders very still in the way that shoulders go still when someone is trying very hard not to cry in a place they think is private. He stared at the screen. He did not know what had happened. He did not know what she was carrying. But something about the sight of her in that storage room, alone, holding herself together with visible effort, hit him somewhere so deep and so unexpected that he stood up from his desk before he fully registered that he was moving. He stopped himself. He stood in the middle of his office for a long moment. Then he sat back down. He did not go to the 14th floor. He was not that far gone. Or at least, that was what he told himself. But he also did not look away from the screen until she had wiped her face, straightened her back, stood up from the bucket, and walked out of that storage room with the same quiet dignity she carried everywhere, as if the last 10 minutes had not happened, as if she had simply stepped into a room and stepped back out, unbroken. He watched her pick up the mop. He watched her go back to work. And Kwon Jae-won, who had not felt helpless in longer than he could remember, sat in his 42nd floor office and felt completely, entirely helpless. He pulled up her HR file again that night. Not looking for anything. Just looking. He read the note from her supervisor again. The kind of person who makes the whole team better just by showing up. He thought about her in that storage room. He thought about her laughing in the lobby with her colleague. He thought about her reading a paperback on a corridor floor at 11:30 at night like it was the most natural thing in the world. He thought about how he had not felt this awake in years. He closed the file. He opened it again. He closed it. He went home. He stood in his apartment, which was large and expensive and completely silent, and for the first time in a long time the silence did not feel like peace. It felt like something was missing. He could not name it. He did not try. He poured himself a drink he did not finish and went to bed and lay in the dark for a long time, and the last thing he thought about before he finally slept was a woman with steady eyes and a private smile and a paperback book, doing her work with more dignity than most people brought to their entire lives. Something was going to have to give. He just did not know yet that it was going to be him. It was his operations manager, Park Sung-min, who accidentally changed everything. Sung-min was the kind of man who noticed things, which was precisely why Jae-won had hired him, and on a Monday morning in the 3rd week of December he knocked on Jae-won's office door, came in with a tablet, and said, "I need to flag something about the facilities team on 14. Jae-won kept his face completely neutral. "Go ahead." Sung-min set the tablet on the desk. There was an email thread on the screen. One of the cleaning staff submitted a formal complaint last week. Against her floor supervisor. Apparently he has been consistently cutting her logged hours on the timesheet, which means she has been working full shifts and getting paid for less. She raised it with HR 2 weeks ago and nothing has been done. She escalated it formally on Friday. Jae-won looked at the name on the complaint. Adiz Okonkwo. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Why has HR not resolved this?" Sung-min shifted slightly. "The floor supervisor has been here 11 years. There seems to have been a decision made quietly to let it settle rather than escalate." "Who made that decision?" "Deputy HR lead." Jae-won picked up the tablet. He read the complaint fully. It was detailed, professional, and completely without self-pity. She had documented every discrepancy. Dates, shift times, logged hours versus actual hours, the difference in pay. 3 months of records. She had done the work of someone who knew that if she was going to fight something she was going to fight it properly, with evidence, not emotion. She had not exaggerated. She had not appealed to sympathy. She had simply laid out the facts in clear, clean language and asked for the matter to be corrected. He set the tablet down. "Suspend the floor supervisor pending full investigation," he said. "Back pay Okonkwo the full amount owed from the first discrepancy. And remove the deputy HR lead from any further involvement in this case. I want a full audit of all timesheet records for the facilities team going back 6 months. Today." Sung-min blinked. This was a faster and more decisive response than he had expected. "Understood. I'll get on it immediately." "And Sung-min." Jae-won's voice was even. "Make sure she is informed directly. Not through a chain of people. Someone calls her today and tells her the matter has been resolved and the correction is being made." "Of course." Sung-min picked up his tablet and left. Jae-won turned his chair to face the window. Seoul spread out below him, gray and vast under a winter sky. He was not thinking about the view. He was thinking about a woman sitting on an upturned bucket in a storage room on the 14th floor, holding her face in her hands, and he was thinking about how she had stood up from that bucket and gone straight back to work, and he was thinking about how she had never once let anyone see that she was struggling, and how she had fought her battle the right way, quietly and with evidence, and how the system had tried to ignore her anyway. He felt something in his chest that was close to anger. Not the cold strategic anger he used in boardrooms. Something more personal. Something that surprised him with its heat. He turned back to his desk and worked. But the crack that had been forming in him for weeks split open a little further. He met her properly for the first time 4 days before Christmas. He had planned it, which was something he refused to fully admit to himself. He had adjusted his schedule again, this time to be on the 14th floor at 7:15 in the morning, and he had brought 2 cups of coffee from the cafe on the ground floor of the building, which he had never once visited before in 6 years of owning the building, and he had walked to the corridor where she was finishing her shift and he had held out one of the cups and said, "Okonkwo." She turned. She looked at the cup. She looked at him. Those steady eyes, completely calm. "I wanted to make sure you received the call about your complaint being resolved," he said. "I did," she said. "Thank you, sir. You documented it well." Something shifted very slightly in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one held back. "I learned a long time ago that feelings don't win arguments. Evidence does." He looked at her for a moment. "That's a hard lesson." "It's a useful one," she said simply. He held out the coffee again. After a brief pause she took it. She wrapped both hands around the cup and he noticed that her hands were slightly red from the cold water she used for cleaning, and he had an irrational and immediate desire to do something about that which he suppressed instantly. "You read on your breaks," he said, before he could stop himself. She went very still. Not frightened. Alert. "You've seen me on the cameras." It was not a question. He did not insult her by pretending otherwise. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she said, "What do you read?" He had not expected that question. "What?" "You watched me read." "I'm asking what you read." He almost smiled. He caught it just in time. "History, mostly. Economic theory." She nodded as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "I read fiction," she said. "Specifically stories where people think they know exactly who someone is and then find out they were completely wrong." The air between them shifted in a way that had nothing to do with the December cold coming through the service corridor. "Merry Christmas, sir," she said. She picked up her bag and her trolley and she walked away down the corridor, and Kwon Jae-won stood holding his coffee and watched her go and knew with absolute certainty that he was finished pretending this was anything other than what it was. If you have been enjoying this story so far, please like this video right now and leave a comment below. It genuinely helps this channel grow and means more stories like this one get made. Now let's get back to it. Christmas passed. New Year came. January settled over Seoul like a held breath, cold and still and sharp-edged. Jae-won found reasons to be on the 14th floor more than any operational logic could justify. Sung-min noticed, said nothing, and updated the schedule accordingly with the loyalty of a man who had learned not to ask questions he did not need the answers to. Ada noticed too. She did not make it easy for him, which he respected enormously. She was not cold, but she was careful. She answered when he spoke to her. She did not seek him out. She treated him with a professional courtesy that was perfectly calibrated and gave nothing away, and he understood instinctively that this was not shyness and it was not indifference. It was a woman who had been in situations before where power dynamics disguised themselves as something softer, and who had learned to move carefully until she knew what she was actually dealing with. He understood that. He had done the same thing for most of his adult life for different reasons. He brought coffee twice more. On the third time she brought one for him, a small cup from a vending machine down the hall, set it on the trolley beside him without comment, and kept working. He picked it up. It was terrible vending machine coffee, thin and slightly burnt, and it was the best thing he had drank in recent memory. He told no one any of this. In late January, there was a small incident that changed the temperature between them completely. He was on the 14th floor at the end of the day, genuinely this time, meeting with his operations team in one of the conference rooms, when there was a loud crash from the corridor and then the unmistakable sound of someone swearing quietly and emphatically in what he was fairly certain was Igbo. He came out of the conference room to find Ada on the floor in the corridor, a full bucket of water overturned, soaking into the carpet, her trolley on its side, and a look on her face that was equal parts exhausted and furious. She looked up and saw him standing there with 3 members of his operations team. A lesser person would have been mortified. She simply closed her eyes briefly, opened them, and said, in a perfectly even voice, "I'll have this cleaned up in 10 minutes." He sent his team back into the conference room. He crouched down and righted the trolley. She stared at him. "Sir, you don't have to." "The wheel is broken," he said, looking at the trolley. "That's why it tipped." "Has this been reported?" "Twice," she said. "It hasn't been replaced." His jaw tightened. He made a note in his phone. He looked at the soaked carpet. He looked at her. She was kneeling on the wet floor, already pulling cleaning cloths from the overturned trolley, methodical and efficient, not asking for help, not asking for sympathy, just handling it. Her knee was on the wet carpet. Her uniform was damp. He knelt down on the wet carpet beside her and helped. She froze. The CEO of Kwon Corporation was on his knees on a wet corridor floor helping her clean up a spilled bucket of water. She said, very quietly, "You'll ruin your trousers." "They'll dry," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes that she did not fully manage to keep contained. Then she looked back down at what she was doing and they cleaned up the spilled water together in silence, and in that silence something was settled between them that had not needed words. The trolley was replaced the next morning. She found a new one outside the service elevator when she arrived for her shift with a small note attached that said simply, "Reported and resolved. KJ." She stood looking at it for a moment. Then she folded the note and put it in her pocket and got to work. She kept it. He found that out later and it undid him completely. February arrived and Jae-won did something he had not done in 4 years. He asked someone to have dinner with him. Not a business dinner. Not a networking event. He knocked on the door of the facility's supervisor's office on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if Ada was available, and when she came out into the corridor he said, without preamble, because he had never been a man for elaborate setup, "I would like to take you to dinner. Not as your employer. As someone who has been trying to find a reason to talk to you for 3 months and has run out of legitimate excuses." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's very honest," she said. "I find it's faster," he said. She tilted her head slightly to one side. "You watched me on cameras for months before you spoke to me." "Yes. And you think dinner is the natural next step? I think it's a better option than pretending I came to the 14th floor to check the fire extinguishers again. Something broke open in her face and she laughed, a real laugh, not the careful professional smile she had been giving him for weeks, but the full-body laugh he had first seen on a CCTV screen months ago, the one that made a room warmer, and he felt it land somewhere in the center of his chest like something coming home. Friday, she said, when she had recovered. And I choose the restaurant. He blinked. He had not expected that. All right. I'm not sitting somewhere that has a dress code I can't meet on a cleaning staff salary, she said, directly and without apology. I know a place in Mapo that's good. We'll go there. He nodded. Friday. She nodded. Friday. She went back to work. He took the elevator back upstairs and sat in his office and did not pretend to check his emails even once. The restaurant in Mapo was small and warm and slightly noisy in the way that good restaurants always were, the kind of place where the food was extraordinary and nobody cared what you were wearing. She was there before him, which he had not expected, already at the table with a glass of water and her coat on the back of her chair, and she looked entirely different out of her uniform. Not unrecognizable. More herself, somehow. Like the version of her he had been seeing fragments of for months had simply stepped fully into focus. They talked for 3 hours. Not about work. Not about the building. About everything else. She told him about growing up in Enugu, about her mother who had raised 4 children alone and done it with a ferocity and grace that Ada described with a pride so deep it was almost reverent. She told him about coming to Seoul, about the first year being brutal and lonely and the second year being the year she decided she was staying because she had stopped running from hard things and started walking through them. He told her, slowly and with more honesty than he had intended, about his father, about the engagement that had failed, about the way he had spent 15 years building things because building was the one thing he knew how to do and he had not yet figured out how to simply exist in a space without constructing something in it. She listened the way she did everything, fully, without interruption, without rushing to fill silences. When he finished she said, "You built all of that to feel safe. But you built so much of it that you locked yourself inside." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes. That's not a character flaw," she said. "That's just what happens when people aren't taught that they're allowed to need things." He looked at her across the table. The restaurant noise continued around them, warm and indifferent. "You're very direct," he said. "I told you," she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted. "Evidence and honesty. They're the only things that have ever actually worked." He smiled. A real one. It felt unfamiliar on his face and he did not try to hide it. He walked her to the subway station afterward because she refused a car and he did not push it, and they stood outside the entrance in the cold February air and he said, "Next Friday." "My choice of restaurant." She raised an eyebrow. "Is there a dress code?" "No dress code," he said. She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she had made a decision she was settled in. "Next Friday," she said. She went down the steps into the station and he stood on the pavement in the cold for a moment before turning back toward where his driver was waiting, and the city moved around him, loud and lit and indifferent the way cities always were, and he felt something he had almost forgotten the texture of. He felt light. He felt, for the first time in longer than he could measure, like whatever came next was not a problem to be managed but a life to be lived, and the difference between those two things, he was only now beginning to understand, was everything. They were not a simple story. There were complications ahead, his family's resistance, the raised eyebrows of colleagues, the navigation of a world that had opinions about who belonged with whom and why. But they met every complication the same way they had met each other, with steadiness, with honesty, with the quiet refusal to pretend that what was not real simply because it was inconvenient for someone else. He learned to be present. She learned to let someone in. And somewhere along the way, between cold corridor mornings and warm restaurant evenings and every small moment in between, the wall he had built around himself did not just crack. It came down completely. And what he found on the other side of it was not vulnerability. It was not weakness. It was the life he had been too afraid to want. And she had known, somehow, from the very first time he had crouched down on that wet corridor floor in his expensive trousers without a second thought, that he was worth the risk. They were both right. That is what love looks like when it is real. Not perfect. Not easy. But worth every single moment of the work it takes to build it. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are not yet part of this community, subscribe to Afro Korean Love Tales right now. There are many more stories waiting for you here, every single one of them made with heart. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video.